Welcome. Sometimes setting up an aquarium doesn't quite go as planned. This project, I had leaking water from the corners of the tank and stand developed a lean, the stand itself started to warp, and I even had smashed glass and fish and water spilling onto the carpet. And of course I had cyanobacteria. That's cyanobacteria. Cyano. But first, a little background. Part 1 of this project was really setting up the tank. The tank itself was a Aqua One Horizon 182 litres, that's about 50 gallons. And I had to contend with receiving it with a smashed glass top. Part 2, we got into the substrate, which included using cat litter and having a dirted substrate. We even did a field trip to collect bog iron for the anoxic plenum. Part 3, well, that was working on building up the layers for the substrate. And Part 4, adding the stones and plants. Part 5 was all about the fish and adjusting the water flow. So what went wrong? Let's get into it. I did encounter a small leak problem. This was mainly when I had the water level right near the top. What was happening was the air bubbles were bursting against the glass lid. Water carried across to this edge and was dropping down into the brace here. And from there, no doubt by capillary action, it came across the top of the glass in here and was dripping. Now, this is something that can happen with any tank with a glass lid. It's usually solved by just moving the air stone further away from the edge, or in my case I had moved the glass further from this end, which gave more space here for drying, and also dropping the water level a little bit more also helped reduce the amount of water that was bubbling against the glass. Not a major. Or so I thought. After taking all reasonable steps to stop this from occurring, it was still dripping. It was getting into the carpet. It was getting under the actual tank itself, between the glass and the top support. This type of board is often used in furniture. It's a fibre board, perfectly good, but once you get it wet, it will soak in that water and it will turn to cardboard and lose its structural integrity. And that's what's starting to happen here. You probably just notice it from the camera angle that it is puffing out and curving down. Not good if you're trying to keep your tank nice and flat. And on the other side, yep, you guessed it, more of the same. I recently saw a video on YouTube from someone else who has the same Aqua One tank, and they had the same problem. There was also a third person with it. So this is clearly a design or production fault. So it's not a tank that I would recommend. I had to stop the leak, so the first step was removing all the water from the top and then using good old silicone. Fortunately, I had a small tube available, so I cut off the base of it so I could get in under that ledge. I then corked it on both ends of the tank. Fortunately, I was able to stop the leaks, but it's been an ongoing battle trying to keep that area dry, and I've used various wedges under the lids to try to let air circulate. The way that the thin glass lids sit on the tank definitely doesn't help. It's really good when you solve a problem, or so you think. Now normally a tank sits upright, but this one didn't read that book and it was deciding it's going to lie on its side. And if I look at the base of the stand, I note that the front is sunk further into the carpet than at the back. Now this carpet is on a foam underlay which would have a slight cushioning effect, but it was quite a thick one. It was the thickest we could get to basically give us some more warmth on the floor. So my theory is that the weight on the front side of this tank is such that it's pushing down into that carpet base deeper. And on the back side, of course, less weight, less pressure. I left it for over a month thinking that things had stabilised. But I suspected that the tank had developed even more of a lean. Now this is clearly a budget tank. The glass is not that thick, and I didn't have a great deal of confidence in the seams. And so I needed to work fast to prevent something worse from happening. One method would be to use wedges or shims to raise the tank and make it level, but I suspected that they would just sink further into the carpet. So my second option was to use coach bolts. I was planning to use bolts on the high side of the base and crank it down lower to the floorboards. I can already see that this cheap particle board stand has already got a bit of a bow there. It's down lower there where all the weight's going, and that part is not, so it's already got a bend, so definitely not a quality stand, but it should do the job, and that's what it's all about. And that's a fail. If at first you don't succeed, fail again. Well, today's project is to try to re-level this tank. It's going to involve removing, without breaking, my small fry tank, anything that's heavy such as the filters, even the air pump, whatever I can get out easily, draining the water, removing most of these stones, and I had to remove these plants and things to do that. Fish will stay in there, and I'll temporarily disturb the home of my 2 resident Borneo suckers, and hopefully I'll be able to then raise the overall tank and insert this. What I have here is an offcut of aluminium wall lining, which would go in your shower area or wet areas. So it's like a sandwich. It's got 2 pieces of thin aluminium and a I'll just call it a packer in between. So hopefully it won't decompress too much, but my intention is to raise the tank by just getting my shoulders under the top part and lifting it, edging this into it, and hopefully that will just give it enough extra height on this side. But I don't know, maybe the carpet will just absorb that extra height as such, and it will be a doomed process. We will see. There's no way to get the wedges that are under there out, but I was able to push them further in with this bar. Surprisingly, it went in quite easily, and I was then able to push it much further so that it would be under the side and centre supports. I started with this and ended with this, and that's as good as it'll get. I'm happy. If you take a look at my community tank, the actual tank support board is 2.5 centimetres thick, whereas on my river tank, which is much longer, it's only, well, less than 2 centimetres. So clearly there's been cost cutting going on. You know, when I assembled the actual stand, I was so concerned about the flimsy materials and what I considered a poor design that I put a wooden brace along the top to help support the tank. I now wish I reinforced everything. Would have saved a lot of grief. But that's not all. When I did initially set it up, the hang-on back filter that came with it was so noisy that I just couldn't use it in a living space. I did send feedback to the Aqua One distributor and they took that on board, but whether or not it went to those that matter, I don't know. So I swapped it out with a canister filter, which I've been happy with. Before I slid that metal bar under the stand, I needed to remove my canister filter to reduce the weight and also remove my little rock farm. Here I have got rocks which are under a bright light and they accumulate mulm and biofilm on the rock surface, and I can then swap it out with the rocks in the tank to provide some fresh food for the Borneo suckerfish. This little tank was sitting on a shelf supported by a couple of wooden bearers. There were also small fry in there. Now the intention was to just pull forward the shelf that it was sitting on and gently lower it onto the carpet and then slide it out of the way, because there's not a lot of weight in this. But as you can see, all the rocks are sitting on the top, and the thing was top heavy. As soon as I attempted to slide it towards me, the whole thing toppled over. The back glass broke and the fry and the water went on the floor. Window film on the back of the tank kept the glass in place, but unfortunately it's a write-off. It's not something I can repair. I'm going to miss this little tank. It was quite good. And how about the fish? Did I have better results with those? Well, you could say I had a mixed bag of results. I initially moved over my small group of white cloud minnows into the tank, and in June of last year I purchased 5 Burmese glow light danios, which were absolutely perfect for the setup. Now both the danios and the minnows thrived and produced a lot of fry, although none survived in the tank, as the adults were quickly becoming expert at finding the eggs and the fry. But I had been able to catch a few of the fry to grow out and boost the number. I had set up the tank especially to have hillstream loaches. Probably the most popular hillstream loach is from the family Sowalia and is often seen in the tanks of many YouTubers. But unfortunately here in New Zealand it is a fish that is banned from import. A hillstream loach that can be imported in New Zealand is from the family Gastromyzone, and these are generally called Borneo suckerfish, and these are also a very interesting fish to keep. In August last year, I became the proud owner of 3 Borneo suckerfish, which joined the community in the river tank. Unfortunately, a month later, one of these suffered a severe injury which became infected. Its body swelled up and it could not be saved. I was somewhat devastated by this, and I suspect it happened when the substrate was being rearranged as a result of the tilting tank episode. 2 months later, I was able to order another 2 suckerfish to bring up the total number to 4. On inspecting the fish, I found that on one, a fin had been almost completely ripped off, creating a gash in the side of its body. No doubt this happened when a net was used to try to dislodge it from the holding tank. Unfortunately, that fish would not survive more than 3 days. I also ordered 2 Venezuelan Coradora, and I was very pleased to see that the supplier had placed carbon pellets in the bag. Cories under stress can give off a toxin which in the confines of a small bag can be very lethal to all the fish, and the carbon can neutralise this. One of the cories did have a deformed tail, but I was not intending to breed it, so I'm okay with this, and they're both still thriving. The 4 Borneo suckerfish gave me a lot of enjoyment during the following 5 months, but one by one they did disappear. A river tank does have hidden dangers, especially for the Borneos, as they certainly live under the rocks just as much as on top of them. But I don't know the reason for their loss. It could have been the disruption that took place with the substrate having to be changed all the time, or it could have been the build-up of cyanobacteria which really affected the water quality. As I cannot guarantee them pristine water conditions, I'm unlikely to stock these fish again. Certainly I did learn many things from having them. For a start, they're not so keen on the smaller rocks. They prefer a large rock which gives them plenty of space to scoot round and check out what's happening all around them, and to chase away any other competition. I found that they didn't really eat the algae that was on rocks, they just preferred the biofilm. And of course that's a bit of a challenge to keep a reasonable supply for them. And certainly they do not like cyanobacteria. Many people in the hobby will have their own theory as to why it should occur, and their own secret remedy as to how to get rid of it. But for me, it was more just trying to control it. I currently have a bloom underway in one of my nanotanks, and I'll be discussing that in my next video. It was not so long after setting up the river tank that cyano was starting to establish, mainly in the hairgrass area, and those plants struggled to survive. It spread to the rocks and to the other plants, and even survived where there's fast flowing water. And of course, it stunk the tank out. Back then I needed to control the Vallisneria, as its roots were in the dirted part of the tank, and it was growing rampant. Well, we're now ready for an extraction. First of all, we'll just loosen the plants up a bit and see what we're dealing with. There's more val there than I thought. So just do it slow and easy so I don't rip up all the dirt substrate. So the plants that were in the front got relocated to the back. The whole purpose was to create a demarcation line over which a vowel shall not cross. Just like magic, there appeared the great wall of sandy bottom, and this was promptly shoved into the dirt. By now, the vowel was starting to realise what was actually happening, and there are murmurings of discontent taking place under the soil. But wait, there was more. There was an extension to the wall. Will this ever end? They knew that they could not stand up against the harsh reality bearing down upon them. Should they ever cross the border to venture into the grasslands, even their fastest runners would be cut down at the roots. They were doomed to an exile in the corner. But in their midst stood an old vale, one that was covered with algae, one that was covered with snails. Although there was mulch planning to be done, a route was being propagated along the back wall. Soon they'll be able to bolt for freedom, and not even the snails would be able to catch them. The tilting tank episode was something that played out over many months. But obviously the first thing I had to do was to reduce the weight of the tank, as I didn't want any undue stress on the glass. So that meant removing all of these rocks and as much of the supporting substrate as I could. And this is what I ended up with. Now a lot of these bags were cat litter or pumice, so there was not a great deal of weight in them. The new look was to be a flatter riverbed. So I've made a couple of changes. This area here was further across, so I've moved that and pushed it into the corner, and that's opened up this space here. So I'm now going to let the vowel grow into there because it looks quite nice when it's nice and thick, and it needs extra room to grow anyway. The hair grass will no doubt continue across here, although I'd like to keep a little bit of sandy area spare just in case I get a catfish or two, or cory, because they would appreciate that open space. This area here is fairly thick and the fish can't get in there as such. I added a branch which was originally going to go in the tank. I had to cut it in half because of the centre brace, it would not fit, and I joined the two pieces together with some cable ties. They'll be hidden with moss later on. Overall, not too bad a look. Later, when the tilting tank had been levelled, I then removed all the rocks at the end and rebuilt the riverbed. This time I just used bags of pumice to act as the base. I used smaller stones instead of the larger rocks, and although not as steep as the original, it still gave me the effect that I was after. The water flow was from the filter outlet in the corner, plus the undergravel filter flowed into the same area, and I had one power head which was on all the time, and a second one which I could switch on if I want to give the fish some exercise. The fish and I were pleased with the overall result. This video goes live tomorrow morning, so I just thought I'd show you how the tank looks today. For an hour or so on a sunny morning, I will get sunlight through here. So to cut back on the cyanobacteria, I've put some black plastic around the tank to cut out that light, and I've got a sunshade draped across the top. I haven't cleaned the tank for 3 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, just so you've got a better idea of what actually is growing in the way of algae, etc. And it's actually looking a lot better. The cyano's gone from most of these stones. There are a couple of traces, and this area, now that I've cut back on the sunlight, is much better. The glass is a bit dirty. That's where it hadn't been scraped off last time I cleaned. So overall it's pretty good. Some hair algae type stuff on, or string algae on the wood there. Some cyano and stuff on the wood near the top at this end. But overall it's looking much better. But the tank's lacking. It needs something else. The fish are still half asleep. I just turned the light on. But it needs a feature fish, and I don't know what to put in it. The local fish shop has closed down, unfortunately, so we have nothing in this town. I'd have to travel or buy online to try to get something. If you have any suggestion as to what would go well on the tank, let me know. I had thought about the glass catfish that I've got in here. I suppose they're going to stay hidden, but you would have seen them in my other videos. They would actually like the river tank, because they certainly do enjoy water flow, and I could visualise them swimming in this part and hiding out in the valve. Separation of the valve from the front's working good. Overall, I'm pleased with the landscape. Still have to keep an eye out for water. I'm trying. I've got a little plastic sleeve on here just to raise the glass to help with the airflow under there for drying. I think I'm on top of it. A little bit of distortion on the support down here, but I don't think that will develop anymore. Listen, if you're going to buy a larger tank, buy quality. You'll save yourself a lot of grief. You might have to save longer, but in the long run I think it'd be worth it. Oh, and I did have another water spill. It's cleaned up now. I'll tell you about it next video. Any hobby will present challenges, and really it's a case of overcoming each one as it may arise, and above all, staying positive. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope I catch you on the next one.